Ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats, please. We'll start in a moment. Thank you. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Matthew Hyman. I chair the Federalist Society's International and National Security Law Practice Group. We, along with NSI, are delighted to present today's program, and I'm particularly honored to introduce today's keynote speaker, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison. Senator Hutchison has had a distinguished career as a public servant, and she's spent significant time working on national security issues. She served as the U.S. Ambassador to NATO from 2017 to 2021. She represented the state of Texas in the U.S. Senate from 1993 to 2013. She's currently an advisor to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and she serves on the NASA Advisory Council. And she's going to talk to us today about the broader geopolitical picture as we think about Ukraine and America's place in the world. So I'll ask you to join me in welcoming Senator Hutchison.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for asking me to come and talk about this, because I think your whole day is really a good one, because it is looking forward to what happens next, and what happens next in the geopolitical world, and also, of course, how we handle the aftermath. So that's what you're doing, and I think that certainly your society has been around for a long time and doing these things, looking at the basics. So I want to start, and I'm going to talk really more in the broad overview of our I guess really our present and our future strategies and difficulties. Because my time at NATO, although I was in the Senate for 20 years and was always in the defense arena, but my time at NATO really put a finer point on the importance of American leadership. And it's because Americans assess a risk and then begin to deter against that risk. That has been what we have done through the years. The Europeans are not like us. You know, someone said, "Are you going to write a book?" And I said, well, yes, and maybe the name of the book is going to be "The Europeans Are Not Like You and Me." Like the old book that came out years ago. And it's true, they are not. They aren't as defense-oriented as we are. They look more toward talking and discussing and keeping alliances. Now, you could look at each country in Europe and see why they do that, because they're smaller. They need to try to get along. It hasn't always worked out in history, but nevertheless, they do seem to want to try to just get along and go along and not be as thorough in saying, here is what the dangers are and here's what we're going to do about it. So what I have found is that we are the ones who will lead and who will take those steps. So now we're into what America really kind of shocked the Europeans a few years ago, 2019, when we were doing our U.S. defense strategy, which we update every 5 years, and then we go on. And we came out then and said, there's going to be a great power competition. It is going to be with China, and to a lesser extent, Russia. But the big issue is China. And when I was at NATO, our Europeans were shocked. They were stunned at this. this hadn't been really brought to the forefront because Europeans are much more aware of and conscious of and dealing with Russia, but not so much China. The economic ties are to China, but the preparing for the worst is Russia for the Europeans. So it was kind of a shock when we came out with what we just believe is the great power competition and that it is real. So you look at in the European context, you had the first in 2014. Russia then went into Crimea, and that really set in our NATO operation and with U.S. leadership saying, well, maybe we better start re-gearing up. Maybe we need to start making sure that we're shoring up, especially the Baltics and then the Eastern Europeans that are in the borders with Russia. And so we started the enhanced forward presence, the beginning to put rotating troops into the Baltics and Poland, and watching more closely what was happening with Russia's interventions, especially in Ukraine, starting with Crimea. And I think that when you start looking at that progression, you then begin to see what we are looking at with the whole Ukraine issue and why this has become now just like a tsunami, really, what they did in February of 2022. So now we are looking at dealing with the whole issue of Russia. That is now first and foremost, but with the distant look at China, the sort of rapprochement that is being made between Russia and China, but looking at what is happening now and then what we are going to look at going forward. So right now, it is very important that NATO stay united, that we, I think the accession of Finland and hopefully soon Sweden, which I think we will get, but Turkey's making it a little difficult for us. But having all of those right on the border with Russia is going to make us very much more aware of and continually vigilant about dealing with Russia. NATO is the largest political military alliance in the history of the world, really. And I will say that the Europeans, mainly Churchill, reached out to us early on after World War II was just ending for us to get into Europe early, to be in an alliance where we would be the leader and we would be there early. And that was the formation of NATO, which was only 13, I think, in the beginning, but then has, of course, built up to be now 21 and soon to be 22, we hope. But NATO is an alliance that is adapting. We adapt after the fall of the Soviet Union. We adapted. We brought in the Eastern countries very quickly, the Eastern European countries, to work with them to build up their defenses after they had just been able to declare their independence after Russia. So it has been very important for us to have this alliance be led by America. because in America, we do assess the risk and then we deter. We start building up to deter. The Europeans would rather talk and talk and talk and not act unless they are sort of forced, which is sort of what we do. NATO has to have unanimous consent to do anything. So we do a lot of talking, and we do a lot of cajoling, and we do a lot of bringing people together and really negotiating a lot. But it has held together in the big picture. So now we have this current invasion by Russia into Ukraine. Now, of course, Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but and now I'm going back to why the great power competition has come into play. It has come into play because we are seeing that long-term future, which is China and Taiwan, and the build up to that is now going through Ukraine and what we do in Ukraine and how we deal with Russia to then have to deal with China. So I think it is what we're looking at with what's happening right now in Ukraine is that we are committed and we are going to stay committed to helping Ukraine keep its independence. And we have stepped up, unlike what we did with Georgia when Russia invaded and took 2 provinces of Georgia. And we said, oh, that's terrible. And then we walked away. And they now are occupiers of those 2 provinces of Georgia, and they're not leaving. They are fortifying the boundaries. They are teaching all the children in those 2 provinces in Russian, and they are Russianizing those. That happened, and now we are seeing the end result of that. Russia had already taken Ukraine by the time that happened. So now we're looking at what we can do to stop Russia in Ukraine, which we will do. Well, I'll say we will do. The Ukrainians have shown that they will do, but we are going to continue to support their efforts. It has been very important that they are doing this with their people, and their spirit is amazing. In fact, the Americans have been helping to, our American defense has been helping them for about 10 years to get ready for any kind of a Russian invasion. So they are well prepared, and they are performing really well with a great leader, I might say, in Zelensky. He has shown to be the citizen leader that will probably go down in history because he wasn't brought up for this, but he has certainly met the call. So since that has happened, and the NATO allies have been very firm and resolute in supporting the Ukrainians in every way possible. We're pushing a lot more. I personally think we should be giving them even more power, which I think will eventually happen, but it has been a little slow, I think, to give them the air power that they need and also the long-range missiles that would help them. I think we were late in giving them the tanks, but nevertheless, we are now stepping up and giving them the power to win this because they have shown that they have the will to win, and we are supporting that. It's important for the long term that we show that we will stick when times get tough in helping a country like Ukraine that is a sovereign nation, that is being invaded by a hostile takeover attempt by Russia, and we are standing with Ukraine for that. And it's so important that we do, because that is going to set the stage for the confrontation that is going to come with China, and especially over Taiwan. It is so important that we have the unity with our European allies as we begin to see what China is doing. When we first came out with the great power competition, the Europeans were shocked. They were resisting this, but then when you start putting the pieces together, and you had what the Chinese were doing with the Belt and Road Initiative, beginning to take positions in all of the container ports all over Europe. Then the Europeans started thinking, well, why are they doing this? Well, why are they coming into our ports? And then you put, right after that, the efforts of Huawei to come in and undercut the competitions for the secure networks for telecommunications. And that's when America stood up and said, do not put Huawei into your systems, or NATO will not even be able to communicate. They will not be able to communicate with you if you are in the Huawei network. You know, UK, who is our greatest, best ally, already was working on putting the Huawei systems into their government systems. And we had some tough talks with UK to say, you cannot do this. We have to have a secure communication at NATO if we are going to be able to meet all of the potential threats that might come from China. At that point, what we had was the Belt and Road Initiative, which was making waves, but they were small waves. And then with Huawei, it became much more significant. And then when UK saw what happened to Australia, when they said Huawei will not be allowed to compete for our internal communication systems, and China came down on Australia with the hammer that all of us had feared could happen if we didn't secure our positions and if we didn't see the handwriting on the wall. So we have this dual now issue of important trade with China, important investments that we are making, we being America, but also all of our European allies in China, making investments. And I think that the importance of European, U.S., and alliance unity is going to be the only way that we can keep China as a rules-based order competitor. We're not against China. We're not against the Chinese people. But we have to have a rules-based order for the leaders of the globe if we are going to have the free and fair competition and if we are going to have the protections that we need. So now we have all of the evidence, and the Europeans are beginning to see this, but what is going to be especially important for us to succeed as the free market, democracies, and rules-based order system to survive is that we would hold together in the largest economies of the world and with the allies. NATO is 31 allies, soon to be 32, we hope. But we have 40 partners that are very important in the NATO network. These are the partners that have asked for affiliations with NATO. We don't and we don't go out and seek partners, but when someone comes to us or a country comes to us and says they want to be part of a NATO partnership, we certainly set the parameters for that, but we want to have allies. So we have roughly 70 in our alliance and partnerships together. So for that to help in this new great power competition, we're going to have to be very solid. And what President Macron did a few weeks ago, a month or so, going to China to visit with President Xi and saying, you know, we're not with America on the whole issue of sanctions or Taiwan. It could, you know, that's maybe their fight. And so we are interested in trade and having a good partnership. That was a shot across the bow, because if we don't have the solid commitments and total unity with the strongest nations, G20 plus the strongest economies of the world, we've lost all leverage with China to try to bring them in. We all want to have China as a competitor under a rules-based order, but a competitor that is infiltrating our defenses and our security, no, we aren't going to stand for that. That's where the alliance has to remain firm. So if the G20, if the allies that are the free democracies of the world, and I say democracies, we do have Middle Eastern partners that are not exactly democracies, but they do want to be our partners. So you put that group together, it must stay together and stay strong. Because having China as a rules-based competitor is good for everyone. But having China as a predator that does not abide by the rules-based order is going to eventually erode everything that we have done. Our intelligence, our intellectual property, our freedoms to be able to operate in a rules-based economy and order. So what we now have is the beginning of coordinating the alliance, which NATO is equipped to do. And they've already started by including the 4 countries that that are the largest economies, leaving out India, but the other 4 are now included in our NATO summit that's coming up this summer. The first invitation went out for last year's summit. The summit is the meeting of the heads of state of the NATO countries. They included Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan in the last year's summit for the first time, and they will be joining again. We're also beefing up now the joint exercises with those countries to try to bring more togetherness in the countries that want to keep the rules-based order of fair competition, but protecting our defenses and our intellectual property. So that is going to be really the next step that we have to start working to achieve. NATO is beginning that. They began when America came out with the great power competition in 2019. At first, the Europeans were very concerned about doing anything that would jeopardize the trade with China. But now they are seeing that we have to shoot for a relationship with China that is productive and on a rules-based order, a fair competition, but not allowing China to be a predator into our systems and then therefore not allow us to compete on a fair basis. And so I will just say that right now, I think we must be very much on guard for keeping the unity of the G20, of the NATO allies, and to have that strength of unity so that we can try to bring China into the rules-based order, be a fair competitor, and not invade Taiwan, which is, of course, a country that is our largest producer right now of the chip maker world. And now I think America is doing the right thing by now reaching out to give government help to the chip makers that are American, that would be trusted. We are doing that now, and that is good in many ways, to have our chips be made here so that we know that they're secure. But on the other hand, we aren't going to even be able to be completely capable with the two big ones that are going in, that are already in the building stage. Number one, it's going to take at least 3 more years to build those out, but also it is going to be important that we continue to have the relationships with Taiwan as they are an independent entity and able to keep the security that we will all need. So this is sort of the looming in the distance, beginning to prepare for and deter the ability for China to get into our communication systems, to get into our security systems. We're also, I'm on the NASA Advisory Council, and we work with Russia on NASA things, which has stayed intact even after this rift that we're having about what they're doing in Ukraine. But China doesn't cooperate at all in space. And we know that space is going to be one of the key areas of warfare. I mean, we've even established a space component of our military because the capability for laser-guided missiles is so very important. But China doesn't deal with sharing information, space debris, which is becoming a real issue. So we've got to protect what we have and keep our Western alliances strong and unified and willing to take the measures that are necessary to try to bring China into a rules-based order, but be prepared to deter them if necessary. So I'll just end there and be happy to take questions because I think what you all are doing right now in looking at these issues, I think your program is excellent. You're looking at the issues of the whole deterrence issue. What do we do after this all settles out? It will all settle out. We hope it will settle out with a Ukrainian victory. It is important for all of our security that we do support a Ukraine victory and that we then provide for Ukraine the capability to be a part of an alliance that will protect the Ukraine from further mischief. But we're a long way from there. And so having the unity of the great economies of the world is going to be our best deterrence to try to keep a rules-based order so that everyone can compete on a level playing field. Thank you.
The senator has kindly agreed to take a question or two from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand and microphone will be brought to you. I see a woman in the back.
Yes, thank you so much for your remarks. You've spoken eloquently about the need to be united with our allies around the world. Now, we also should be united to the extent possible at home. And I'm not going to speak to defense policy right now, but certainly a few years ago, there was a major issue brought up about certain companies in Silicon Valley, and specifically Google was named, where employees were pushing to reject defense contracts because I think of the old sense that we don't want to be involved in that kind of effort. The head of Palantir has spoken eloquently about this, how it's unsustainable. Do you have a sense of whether that continues, or whether the Defense Department's getting the support that it needs out of Silicon Valley?
Well, that's an interesting question, whether the Defense Department is getting what it needs out of Silicon Valley. I can't answer that directly, but I do think your point is a good one, and that is that we need all hands on deck with our intellectual property, and to be able to use that for defense purposes, of course. And I think that I am very concerned sometimes when I see what Congress is doing and looking at where we are right now, knowing what we're doing to help Ukraine, which is we're doing the lion's share. Our allies are helping, but we have the largest economy, and we are using that to help the Ukraine effort. But we need to make sure that we also are absolutely protective of the intellectual property of our potential communicators or providers, and that's what we should be doing, and we should be unified in that, and we should not be going off on tangents about extraneous issues, because if there's one thing that the U.S. has led the world in doing, it is keeping a strong defense, planning for the future. Unlike the Europeans, we have planned for the future. Defense, I'll just give you an example of when I was at NATO. We are the leader of NATO, and we need to be the leader of NATO, and almost every European wants us to be the leader of NATO, because we will assess a risk and we will start deterring against it early. The Europeans will not do that. They will want to talk, they will want to delay provocative action, and they know that we will push them, and that most of them want us to push them. Even the ones who don't like that we're the leader, they still know that we are going to be the ones to push, to deter. That's why they were reluctant in the beginning about seeing what China was doing. But then when it started becoming clear from China's own actions, starting with the Belt and Road Initiative, and the tactics they used against the Europeans, made them see that this was maybe not going to always be the alliance that could have trading partnerships and trust together. And then you put on top of that what happened with COVID, and then what China's doing right now with Russia, helping them buying oil against the sanctions. just all of those things have begun to show the Europeans that we've got to stay solid. And I don't know your particular question about Google, but I think the other thing that we need to see, and it's beginning to be an issue in Congress. There has been this sort of unwritten rule in Congress, kind of skepticism, but yet a rule, that if you increase the military budget, then you have to do equal increases in the domestic budget, in the social issues. And that can no longer stand because we have so overspent in the COVID protection, much of which was needed. We now need to make up, and we need to do more in the defense side. Because number one, we see now that we've got real issues. We've got real adversaries, and we've got adversaries who are stopping at nothing. But number two, you have to be able to have a budget that is capable of being paid for. And right now, we've gone heavy on the domestic side, rightly so, mostly on the COVID issues. But now we're pretty much over COVID. We've got to beef up the defense side. We need that. We need that to keep everything we do with Ukraine is a message to China. It is, we will stick to our guns. You know, when the Russians invaded Georgia, 2009, we said, oh, you know, this is terrible, and then we walked away. And then 2014, Crimea, oh, this is terrible, but we walked away. We're not walking away now. We are going to stick with Ukraine. We are going to bring them into a victory here. They're using their own people. I'm not saying that we are going to put Americans on the ground in Ukraine, but we are going to stick with them to give them the tools they need and they have shown they deserve to fight back this terrible invasion of their sovereign nation. And that is a signal also to President Xi that we are going to stick and we've got to show that strength. And what President Macron did was begin to kind of ratchet down whether we were unified. And it is very important that that not happen. And that's something we need to watch very carefully in the next few years. Are we going to stand firm with the rules-based order in dealing with China, free and fair playing field? And are we going to stand up against a Russian aggression? Because they are continuing to ping to see where they can make progress. Belarus, Moldova, that's what they would be looking at for the next step. And we've got to, now Moldova is in their arena already, but Moldova is not in their arena. Belarus is, and we should be looking out to try to, and we are, frankly, we are doing a lot with Moldova to try to help them shore up their defenses so that they can stay a sovereign nation or become very, very closely allied or in Romania if they choose to do that.
One more question for the senator. The gentleman over here.
Thank you very much. My name is Hiro Watanabe. I'm working for Japanese newspaper Sankei Shimbun. Thank you very much. I really totally agree that the victory of this war in Ukraine is really important for all of our security. And also it's the best way to deter China from invading Taiwan. So, but the question is, what's your picture of victory? And what victory we share with Ukraine? I was in Ukraine for 5 weeks, and I asked this question to Ukraine people. It's without question their picture of victory. It's take back all territory, including in Crimea. But we asked that by the administration, they said, well, that question referred to Ukraine. They said we support Ukraine as long as it takes, not saying to support Ukraine to win as soon as it can. So do you think we should immediately share the common goal of this war with Ukraine?
Yes, I think that we need to do more to help Ukraine win now. We have been careful, and I don't criticize our being careful about what we have given to Ukraine, but I do think that we now must give them the air power, the F-16s that they've been asking for, the longer range missiles, and I think it's time to help them win. This stalemate is in Russia's favor, not Ukraine. But on what is victory, it's a very good question, but that has to be the decision of Ukraine. They must decide when to go into a negotiation and what is the negotiating starting point. That is, they have fought for that and deserve to make that decision. And I don't think we should be telling them when to go into a negotiation or how. Now, once they have set those parameters, we will be there to help in every way. I know we will, so will the Europeans, and all of the allies that are helping beyond the NATO alliance. There are other allies that are helping, many of whom we've just talked about. So I think we have to let them make that decision. They have earned that right. Once we do get to a negotiated settlement, then I think everyone believes that we will be helpful to rebuild Ukraine. We will give them defense assurances that they deserve to have. And at some point, I mean, we have said from years ago that we hope they will be a member ally of NATO. And I think that that's what we are working toward. And by the way, I think I will say your Prime Minister Kishida has been a very strong advocate here and went to Kyiv to meet with President Zelensky very early in his time. In fact, I think his first meeting after he was elected was to go to the summit last year of NATO, and he was very much welcomed. And now I will say personally that I am really pleased that Japan is building up its defense now, its defense systems, which had not happened. I think now they're on the right track, and I applaud that.
Great. Well, if you all join me in thanking Senator Hutchison for her presence today. And we will resume the program at 1:30 with our second panel.